What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Tequila Tuesday, brought to you by Scotty's Little Sales Club, soon to be known as Go to Market United. Big transition. For those of you who haven't heard, reach out to me, shoot me a note if you haven't seen my messages. But migrating the platform and folding in some new stuff. So hope you stick around and join me for that. We are here today with Katy McFee. She is the founder and principal at Insights to Action Coaching and Consulting. She specializes in helping women become tech executives. Katy and I don't know each other super well, but we were on this podcast a little while ago, the Surf and Sales podcast with Richard, and we had a fun conversation. And I thought, wow, this is like perfect for this group here at Scotty's Little Sales Club. So I asked her to come on the show, and she's got some cool stuff ready for us. So Katy, I'll turn it over to you. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. And a couple of people connected with me actually in advance and said like, hey, connecting in advance of Tequila Tuesday. And I was like, oh, wow, people know I'm going to be on this
I
thing.
shared your LinkedIn profile earlier. I'll drop
cool.
it. I'll drop it again here in the chat, but I shared it earlier so people could kind of lurk and spy on you, learn about it.
Lurk away. So as Scott mentioned, right now I've got a coaching and consulting business. I primarily work with women to help them, break into the executive level. I actually have a goal. I want to help 1,000 women, in my career, become executives. But before that, I spent 18 years in my own corporate career. So that was my corporate experience. Where I was like a salesperson for a bunch of time. And then I was a manager and then a director and then a VP and then an EVP. So I know lots about navigating careers. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk to you guys about navigating your next career move. And as I mentioned earlier, for anyone who was on, feel free to unmute and to ask questions throughout it. I'm not an overly formal person, so you don't need to like put up your hand or whatever. If I'm done my sentence, you can jump in. I'll try to pause. I'm kind of a talker, so I'll try to pause and give you guys an opportunity. But I'm happy to make it a conversation. So yeah, let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen. It's funny because I told Scott in advance of this I was not going to make slides, and then I made slides.
You can't resist.
I couldn't help it. I was actually on vacation, and I was like, I'll just throw together a couple.
Are these Tamarindo slides right here?
These were made in Tamarindo, fresh off the press.
I
just had an epiphany. And actually, the funny thing is, when I was thinking about what to talk about, that came to me when I was doing dishes. Like doing dishes, and I'm like, I know exactly what I need to say. I wrote it in my phone, and then when I was in Tamarindo, I suddenly had it come to me that I need to make slides. So hopefully, everything in my career is that.
Well, we've got Kelsey, Jill, and Zach here who have all been to Surf and Sales, so they know the Tamarindo energy very well.
Okay, Cafe Flora was my favorite. I don't know if you guys went there, but lots of great stuff. So okay, so I will jump in. So what I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to talk about negotiating your next career move. I'm going to finish with that. But before I jump into it, I want to talk a little bit about one, when is the right time to make a career move? Should you think about leaving your current gig? And two, where should you go next? What is the next right move for you? And then third, I'll end up with, how do you negotiate your next career move? How do you set yourself up for success in whatever it is that you want to do? Okay, so how do you know it's the right time to make a move? I always ask my clients 3 questions when they come to me. A lot of people are stuck in this decision, right? They're like, maybe, do I want to make a move? I'm getting contacted by recruiters. This sounds kind of interesting. The first question I always ask is, are you aligned with the culture at your current company, right? And so when I say culture, I'm not talking about ping pong tables and swag or free snacks. I'm talking about, can you bring your full authentic self to work? Do you feel valued by your colleagues? Are you aligned with your company's values, right? And this is really, really important. I remember reading that not being aligned with your company's values or with what you're doing as part of your job is a bigger predictor of burnout than the numbers of hours you're working. So like when you really feel aligned with what you're doing, when you have a why, right? A strong mission, you can actually do a lot and you can remain energized. When you start to feel unaligned, that's when it, motivation kind of wanes. And maybe you're no longer feeling great where you are. So that would be the first question I'd ask myself. Do you feel aligned with your current company's culture? If the answer is no, it's kind of a no-brainer for me that might be an indicator you want to start thinking about something else. If the answer is yes, then we move on to the next question. So the second question I always ask is, do you have a supportive manager and are they invested in your career development? This is like an absolute game changer. Most of you guys probably know this. I'm sure Scott has talked about this lots too. Like there are some managers you will have that are invested in your growth. They want to see you succeed. They're willing to invest in your development and having conversations about your career, even outside of what you might be doing on a day-to-day basis for them. That is like absolute gold if you can find that in a boss. On the flip side,
can I add one thing to that?
Yeah, please.
I'll be curious what your take is on this. I would actually say that is more important than the product that you are selling.
Yes, I would agree.
Meaning if I believe so much in Katy and your leadership and coaching and all that, I don't give a shit what we're going to sell. Yeah. I don't care if it's MarTech, FinTech, non-tech, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm going, yeah, okay.
Well, yeah, we hear this more and more, right? Where people go to work for managers versus going to work for a company. And like, this is something that has bitten me personally, where I worked in biotech for a long time, and I had this rose-colored view of a certain company that I really wanted to work for. Big multi-billion-dollar company. And I ended up finally getting a job to work for them. And 6 months later, the reporting structures changed and I started working for someone. And this guy, like, I used to wonder if he hated me. Like I used to almost joke and ask my colleague, like, does he hate you as much as he hates me? Because he would like dodge our one-on-ones. He didn't care about my development. Like I really felt like he didn't want me on his team. And it like crushed my motivation. Like I was miserable and I didn't last 2 years there, even though I had wanted to work there for years. So like, we see lots of stuff on this, like, people don't leave companies, they leave bosses and all this, but it's true. Like it is true. Having someone who will invest in you can have a massive impact on your career trajectory. Like not just your day-to-day happiness, but where you're going to be in like 3, 5, 10 years, because they set you up on that path. So I'll never forget my very first job. I had an awesome boss. I had lots of opportunity to grow. And I always say like that first job, yeah, I worked my ass off, but I also had lots of opportunity. It set up my career trajectory from the beginning. So game changer, ask yourself, is my boss invested in me? Is my manager invested in me? The last one is, do you still feel as though you're growing and developing in your current role? Also really important. If you think about things that make people happy, we are generally happiest during stages of growth, which is why when you're learning something new and you're building something new, like even if it's super frustrating day to day, you feel good, right? Even if you love the company, even if you have a great boss, if you can do your job in your sleep and you're no longer developing, there's nothing challenging you, you can start to feel pretty demotivated in your role. So great question to ask yourself, am I still growing? Am I still growing? Am I still developing? If you are, it's a great reason to stay. Like we'll often talk about leaving, right? We often talk about moving on to the next thing and where to go and why that's great. But also thinking about reasons to stay is good. And if you're still feeling challenged and motivated, I'll often encourage people to stay where they are, because there's probably still lots to learn. I'm also a big fan of mastering something before you move on to the next thing. So I'll give you an example. Like I was in sales for a long time, moved into leadership, but I was always pretty focused on like going up the ladder. Like I was always pretty focused on moving my way up. And I remember once I became a director and I started to oversee, because I went in to become a director of sales, but I ended up overseeing marketing and sales operations. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, I wish I had done some marketing. Like I wish I'd spent a bit of time like doing some other stuff instead of just like trying to go right to the top, because I'm not going to do it now. Like now I'm a director going to become a VP and I'm not interested in going backwards. So, you know, finding ways to stay challenged in your current role or in your current company, if you do have a great boss and if you do really love the culture, can be really smart as well. Okay. What do I not think you should base it on? I talk about this a lot. So if anyone already follows me on LinkedIn, you'll probably see this. The first one is money. And this is not to say money's not important. I am a fan of like negotiating the best possible salary you can get wherever you go, putting up your hand, asking for a raise, advocating for yourself. However, I've seen lots of people jump from a job or a position or a place they really were happy and they liked for like 10K or for a bigger, OTE that was not real, right? This is like their potential OTE, but no rep actually hits that. And they've got dollar signs in their eyes. And then when they move to this new place, they're disappointed. I'm not going to say this is always the case. Sometimes you move somewhere and you're like, yeah, this was the right thing. But I have seen lots of people move just for the dollars and for nothing else. They're not looking at, where's my growth potential? How do I feel about this new culture? Who am I going to work for? And they ended up being really disappointed with where they ended up. So beware if the decision is only based on money. The second one is stock options. Again, I'm going to share a very traumatic personal story. So I worked at a company and I stayed way too long. I should have left. But I was there for 8.5 years. And part of the reason I stayed was because I had so many stock options, so many. Like every time they wanted to thank me, they just like gave me way more options. And I was a relatively early employee, and I had been there for a long time. And so I was biased. Like I thought this company was going to be amazing. So even though I was no longer growing, they were not going to promote me. Like the writing was on the wall. I was not going to get promoted. I was no longer happy. Did not want to leave, right? Like I was like, I cannot leave this money on the table. So I'll tell you how the story ends. I finally decided to leave. I went and took my first VP sales role. Best decision I made way more money, was way happier. Took a whole bunch of my own money and bought 100,000 of those options. Okay. Company ended up going to zero, declared bankruptcy. I got a goose egg, nothing. So now it's a gift. Everything's a gift because now I can share this with you. You guys can learn from my mistake.
I feel this pain deeply.
Okay.
I think I explained to you a few months ago. I have also exercised over 100,000 worth of shares and ended up at a goose egg. So
yeah. It happens. Yeah.
Painful.
Because for every, what they say, for every 9 startups that fail, 1 succeeds, right? We all think we're in the one that's going to succeed. No one's thinking, no, I'm probably in the one that's going to fail, or you wouldn't be there. So, if the options are the only thing keeping you there, right? I mean, I've done the same thing. I've left a company before, didn't exercise my options because I was like 25, getting married, and I was like, I can't afford $17,000. And then the company exited. I was like, I probably should have come up with the money. Both things can happen. And so really focusing on like, what's going to make you happy? Like, where are you going to be happiest working day to day? Because again, 8.5 years, I kept thinking the exit was 18 months out, and it just kept moving. Okay. Third one is fear. So this little symbol is for fear. And by that, I mean, if you're staying where you are because you're afraid you're going to look like a job hopper, You're afraid you're not going to be able to hack that next role. You're afraid that maybe you're just successful here, but you might not be successful somewhere else. Like all of these fears that tend to hold us back, I would argue that is a poor reason to stay, right? You would be amazed what you can achieve when you just give yourself the chance. So it's fear holding you back. We're not going to get into unpacking that in this because this could take all day. But it is worth it's worth sort of investigating, right? It's worth peeling a little bit of that back and asking yourself, like, why is fear holding me here? How do I want to show up? What do I need to do to get over this? Okay. So let's jump into, now you've decided you want to make a move. Where should you go? When you're choosing a new company, think about those 3 things I just talked about first, right? If you're leaving a company for these reasons, make sure you're thinking about these same factors when you're choosing a new company. Who am I going to work for? Are they going to invest in me, right? How do I feel about the company's mission and values? All of these things. But let's say you are thinking about a transition. You're not quite sure if you want to move into the same position. Maybe you want to try and do something else. You might be wondering, like, where should I be going next? So again, I'll share 3 considerations for you, 3 things that you can ask yourself. And the first is, what is your career vision? I'm going to guess that most people have never thought about this or put something on paper. It's something that I introduced, like all of my clients I use this with. I create an actual like physical career vision tool. It's like a life vision, career vision. And the reason why is because if you can get clarity on where you ultimately want to end up, like in your wildest dreams, right? This doesn't have to be limited to, oh, but like I'm doing this now, or my background is only X. Like ask yourself, okay, forget all of the limitations. Where do you ideally want to be? Maybe you want to be a CEO. Maybe you want to be a VP. Maybe you want to start your own business. And start to like get really clear on what that looks like to you. And that's so powerful because then you can actually start working backwards to say, okay, what would like the big steps actually look like to achieving this goal? And then you can go even further to, okay, what choices do I need to start making in my life today? Or even what is like one baby step I can take tomorrow? And you would be amazed at how tangible big dreams become when you actually create something like a career vision. So you might not want to do something as formal as a career vision, but just asking yourself that question, like spending a bit of time in that question, where do I want to go? Because then as opportunities are arising, you can test them against that. Like, does this align with my vision? I'll give you guys an example. I have a client who decided she wanted to leave. She was a tech exec and she decided she wanted to leave and work on her family business. Okay. And I was talking with her recently and she's like, I'm doing this stuff. I'm working on the family business, but I'm also thinking like, maybe I should be like doing this course and doing some consulting and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she was feeling guilty that she wasn't doing this other stuff. And so like I asked her, I was like, well, what's in line with your vision? What's your vision? She's like, oh, in my vision, I'm not doing any consulting. I'm just doing the family business. That's the only thing I care about. I was like, well, then why are you going to distract from that, potentially take away time that you would be pouring into it to make it succeed to do this consulting, right? Like right now, it was not a money thing. She was fine financially. So again, coming back to your vision, whether you want to call it a vision or a plan or whatever, vision might sound a little too woo-woo for you guys. But it can help you to make these decisions in a really clear way. Let's say you're not ready for a vision.
Can I ask a question about the vision?
Yeah, please.
One of the things I used to tell people is my job is not to help people figure out what they want to do when they grow up. My job is to help those people who know what they want to do get there, get there faster. So for anybody who's got a boss or somebody that they're working under, I think it's an important distinction, because if you're looking to them to help you figure out what you want to do with your life, it's not going to happen. But
Mhm.
if you come to me or you come to Katy and we were your boss and you said, listen, I really want to be a founder one day. I really want to be a VP of customer success. I really want to be a early stage VP of sales. Then we also have a vision that we can craft for you. And those two visions can find, alignment. It's just so much easier to help somebody. So you do this for yourself, I think, like Katy's talking about, but you also do it for the people that you work alongside and the people that you work for, so they can help you get there faster.
Mhm. I actually love that you brought that up because I've experienced that as a leader tons of times as well, right? Where there was individuals on my team who were really clear about this is what I want, and others who were basically like, I don't know what I want. I think we're hoping I was going to craft something together for them. And then ended up being really disappointed because I like put someone in a role because they were clear that they wanted it. And then the other person had been pretty clear that they didn't want it. And the thing I used to say to people that worked for me is like, you don't want me creating your career plan because I'm not the one who's got to go to work every day and execute it, right? Like you're the one that's going to have to live this out. So don't ask me what you should do. Like I might pick something you hate. So yeah, I'm glad that was brought up because it is important to get clear on it yourself, and no one can really tell you. You can look at someone else's path and be like, hey, that's inspirational. Maybe I want to do that. But no one else should be telling you what your plan should be. So this exercise could actually help you with that. This is something, let's say you're like, you're a bit stuck. You're a bit stuck in where you want to go. This was an exercise that I did when I was an EVP. So when I was an EVP, before I left the corporate world, I was kind of miserable in my day to day, and I wasn't sure why. And so I decided to create this list. What energizes me? Like what sucks the life out of me? What sucks my energy? And I listed like every single thing I did as part of my job in one column or the other. And it was eye-opening for me because I got into sales and I got into leadership because I loved developing people. I loved helping people reach their potential. I loved, working with really cool customers. And then when I was, an EVP sales, I was spending all of my days doing contracts, in legal meetings, talking about compliance, like all of the things that like at my core being, like make me die a little inside. So it was super eye-opening for me to do this exercise because I was like, wow, the things that energize me, like the list is really short, and the things that drain my energy, the list is really long. Another, actually, before I get into that, the reason I focus on what energizes you versus what you're good at is because there's actually a lot of data out there that shows you are more likely to achieve mastery in something if you're passionate about it than if you're naturally talented. Kind of crazy, right? We always think, often people come to me, they're like, I want you to help me figure out my path, like based on my strengths. And I was like, screw your strengths. Like, sure, you can think about that if you want to, but like, I want to know like what lights you up, what makes you want to like jump out of bed and work. That's the thing that you should be basing it around, because those are the things that you're going to be willing to pour the hours and days and months and years into becoming amazing at. Whereas if you're naturally talented at something, but you don't really like it, it's going to be a slog all the way along. So that's why I say what energizes you versus like, hey, what am I good at? Thinking about what energizes you is really powerful. The other thing you can think about, again, this is more for people who are thinking like, do I want to transition out of what I'm doing now? Is what do you like in your spare time? Right? Like it's so funny because like for the longest time I was on the leadership path, but when I think about it in retrospect, it's really obvious I should have been a coach. Because in my spare time, all I did was read about coaching my team, self-development, like understanding who I really am, like all of this stuff, right? I mentored women for free in my spare time on like navigating their careers and being successful and getting promoted. And I was the chair of a nonprofit organization called Women Powering Technology that helped empower women in their careers. And I joined like helped found a local lean in chapter to help women in the workforce navigate their careers. Like, it's like the writing was on the wall that what I do now is like a pretty obvious choice, but at the time it was hard to see it.
Yeah.
So an exercise where you actually actively ask yourself that can be pretty interesting.
Let's go to Evan real quick. Evan has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. This is awesome. And I really love the way that you can kind of differentiate what energizes you versus what drains you. My question is kind of, where does curiosity come into play on these two sides of things? Because I've found it to be something that can definitely energize me, but I've also found it to be something that can drain my energy. Is that somehow factored into this calculus, or is this something that would be perhaps separate and apart?
Great question.
That's a really interesting question. Can I ask you one more question before I answer? And that is, can you give me an instance where curiosity drains you?
Absolutely. So the act of coaching someone generally involves a layer of discovery where I got to be really curious about what is going on with that person. And in so doing, I learned things about that person that are honestly really sad, depressing, and kind of heartbreaking. It certainly energizes me to want to help that person, but it also drains my energy because I know that there's only so much I can really do.
Yeah, gotcha. That's great context. The way I would think about it, I'll be curious if Scott has a different thought. The way I would think about it is curiosity is an element that can be involved in all kinds of different things. So I would probably look at the broader like task or broader what's the word I'm looking for? Like the broader element, whether it's like coaching as a whole. Yes, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, right? Like sometimes we're going to have positive and negative interactions in whatever we do, but as a whole, does it energize you? Do you walk out of a coaching call with your team and go like, man, I feel great? Or do you walk out of a coaching call and be like, I'm really glad I did that. It was good for them, but man, I need a nap, right? It's probably one or the other. Thoughts on that?
I'm looking at Evan nodding his head back and forth, thinking.
Yeah, so perhaps coaching was not the example to lead with. Because on one side, like if it goes well, it absolutely energizes me. If it doesn't go well, it gets to be more vexatious, and it gets me consumed with thinking about it and going deeper and trying to, really solve an issue, right? I guess I was thinking.
Can I chime in, Evan?
Hit me.
So curiosity often drains the hell out of me. So I tend to not be a very curious person, I think. And I justify it, for better or for worse. I justify it by it increasing my ability to focus on the things that I'm currently doing. So, example, I was on a partnership call today where I got the gist of what somebody does to figure out whether or not I can refer people their way. They said to me, don't you want to see the product and like watch how it works? I'm like, no, I don't care. It doesn't matter. I understand what you do. I have no desire to see all the dashboards and reporting and the colors. I don't give a shit. I'm not curious about it. To me, that's time suck. That's a distraction. I don't need that in order to get what I want out of this particular thing. So in my head, I don't think I'm that curious of a person, and I think the curiosity drains me more often than not. I don't know if that's like an angle that you were thinking about with your question, but that's what I was thinking about when you were
Scott,
asking.
don't you think it's dependent? Like, I'm sure when you were building your next thing you're doing with Kyle, I forgot the name, go to market.
Jill pays very close attention to all the things that I'm up to. She got the partner's name wrong and the company's name wrong, but who's counting?
I didn't say it's,
Yes, you did. You
well,
said Kyle,
God,
not
you
Ryan. I
did.
hope Ryan watches this and,
Oh,
and
Ryan
sends you a
Walker,
note.
sorry. Okay, I did. I got everything wrong. Well, see, because I wasn't paying attention. Um, do you think it's dependent though on, because I totally relate to what you were just saying, and in that scenario, I wouldn't be curious either. But if
Mhm.
it was more related to someone you were consulting for, you'd have to know a little bit more to take them to market. So,
I don't disagree with that, but I am the type of person that will try to know the least amount possible in order to do
I
the
relate to
best,
that.
in order to do a good job. But I don't want to know everything. Yeah.
It's
Darian,
an
you want to chime in?
interesting.
1 second, Katie. Darian's got her hand up. Go ahead, Darian.
Yeah, I think it's like sales discovery questions. I can sit there and ask you 1,000 questions and be naturally curious if you interest me, but that doesn't make any of them important. Meanwhile, I can ask you one super important one and reduce the amount of time we spend together infinitely. I think the question is around curiosity, but the answer I think lies less with curiosity, because what I'm hearing is that different elements of the curiosity are what drain you or energize you, and less the curiosity itself. It's more the outcome that comes with it. And so I think it's more about just positioning your time where you, like, positioning coaching where you want to position it in an area that intrigues you and energizes you, and away from where you find like the pitfalls and, you know, the highly draining conversations stemming from. Essentially, which discovery question are you going to ask? The one that takes you down the road that energizes you, or the one that takes you down the road that drains you in a second?
I like that. Yeah, thanks for that, Darian. I guess where I'm coming from is that as you said, it can be entirely contextually dependent, whether it is energizing or draining. I guess I was curious to you, Katie, whether what are you curious about might be a third column here. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So in the context of what are you curious about, like that's almost another, like, so when I think about what do you do in your spare time, what are you curious about? Like, I'll often ask people, what do you do in your spare time? What do you read about in your spare time? Which, what do you read about is often another, just another way of saying, what are you curious about? What do you like learning about? Because as we're talking through this is a really interesting, I'm glad you brought this up, because it's a really interesting topic. To me, I think curiosity, whether it drains you or energizes you, is going to be dependent on the topic. Like, to me, it's curiosity itself. To Darian's point, is neither. I mean, it could be for some people, but for me personally, it's not draining or energizing. I'm generally a curious person, so I am on the curiosity side, but I don't want to see a demo either of anything. I'm curious about people.
all of us jaded salespeople.
Yeah, screw your demo. But like, I'm curious about humans, about people, right? So if I meet, I don't like superficial conversation. Like, I was talking to my partner about this the other day. I was like, I don't like parties. I like dinner parties of 6 to 8 people maximum, because I like to have deep conversation. And so I get really curious about people. When I meet someone, I'm like, tell me more. Why, like, what do you do? Why do you do that? Like, why did you make this change? Like, I actually care. And my partner's such an introvert. He's just like, I don't understand you. You're an alien. Like, why do you care so much about people you barely know? But I'm naturally curious about people. Whereas if it's a software tool, zero curiosity. Or if it's like a contract, too many words. So I think that it might be interesting for you to, again, like, tap into, where does it feel energizing and where is it not?
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for entertaining that tangent. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a good tangent. Okay. So then I'm going to ask yourself what you're curious about. Okay. The next consideration here, the final one, is strengths and weaknesses, right? And actually, I'm curious if people have thoughts, although I can't see everyone, but there's always the old question, the sort of age-old question, like, should I focus on developing my strengths, or just leaning into my strengths, or should I actually actively focus on developing my weaknesses? So for me, I have observed that minimizing exposure to my weaknesses and leaning into my strengths is where I've seen the most success. And trust me, I've spent years trying to develop weaknesses, right? And so when I was a director in that stock option job, I really struggled to show up as the leader that I wanted to. So this was the job where, I write about this all the time, where I'm like, I was a director, I was trying to get promoted, I was like banging my head against the wall, they wouldn't promote me, like, took years and years. Finally, I went somewhere else and I got a VP sales job. Here's the interesting thing. When I was a director trying to get promoted, I was like working my ass off. I was doing everything I could possibly think of. I just wasn't seeing the results I wanted to see. And I was not like impressing my fellow leadership. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like I asked myself, I was like, maybe I suck. Like maybe I shouldn't even be an executive. Ended up landing a VP sales job at like a hyper-growth SaaS company. And I like killed it. Like it was like night and day. So I went to this new company. I saw way better results, like massive revenue growth, tons of success in everything I wanted to do. It was way more fun. Like I just thought my job was a lot more fun and it felt pretty easy. The big difference for me, I wasn't doing anything drastically different. I was a director sales and then I was a VP sales. It was a different stage of company. And it was only when I was actually at a scaling stage company that I was like, this is where I am supposed to be. It was so obvious to me when I stepped into that role. At my prior role, it was early stage. We did not have product market fit. And I operate best in a company where there's like at least a few million in revenue, where there's product market fit, where we understand who the customer is, right? And then I can like make all the pieces move and scale the team and figure out the processes and do all the stuff, right? Create the culture and yada, yada. But in those really early days where it's like, should we be pivoting markets? Should we be changing the product? Like, can we get this written into guidelines? Like all of this stuff. It was just stuff that wasn't really in my wheelhouse. And so no matter how hard I worked or how hard I tried, I was never going to look like a superstar at that company. It's just never going to happen for me. And so this was obvious to me. It's like, when is my VP sales role? And then I even thought like, well, maybe I just got lucky here. But then when I went into my EVP sales role, it was the same thing, right? I did really well there. And it's because of the stage of company. I realized at this point, I need to be at a company that's at least at this stage. So starting to get some of that self-awareness for yourself, like what am I really good at? What are the things that come easy to me that I really, kick ass in when I'm doing, that I enjoy doing? And then what job or stage of company or type of company or whatever it is going to allow me to leverage that as often as possible? Because the more time you're spending, like every job, you're going to occasionally do things that you don't like, or maybe you're not that great at. The more you can minimize that, the more fun your job's going to be. And honestly, you just look better, right? Like they're going to give you more money. They're going to promote you. All of those things will happen when you're in your sweet spot. So great thing to reflect on. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And actually, another thing I'll share is like when I was at that really early stage company, I knew that my strength was people. I didn't even realize that one of my other big strength is connecting the dots. So I'm really good at connecting dots, where someone can like give me a whole bunch of like miscellaneous information and I'll be like, this is the thread. Like my brain naturally does that really well. Because of the stage of company I was in, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to do that. Whereas when I moved to a company where we actually had like data, like lots of data, lots of stuff I could pull upon, I could just like dig in the data and learn all this stuff and be like, I've got it. This needs to be our strategy, right? And it would work. This is the thing that I was good at. But again, when I was in an environment that didn't allow me to do that, it was hard for me to even recognize that as a strength. Okay. So last but not least, how do you set yourself up for success once you decide it's time to make a move? Number one piece of advice I always tell people is network. Network. Everybody says this, but it's so true, right? Like you can blindly apply to thousands of jobs and you might get a call, you might not. But if your contact gives you a recommendation to the VP, you're probably going to get an interview, right? Networking is a lot easier now than it used to be. It used to be like you had to go to in-person networking events all the time, which is like, even for an extrovert like me, that's pretty painful. Whereas now you can network a lot on LinkedIn, right? Like doesn't even mean you have to post. You don't have to necessarily become a creator, but you can engage with people. You can send people messages. You can find out who on that platform you're really interested in getting to know. I've actually met some like legit friends and business partners and all kinds of other things on LinkedIn. The other piece of this is maintaining your current network, which lots of people are not great at, right? So old boss, old mentor, old colleagues, like people who you've worked with, who you really valued, stay in touch with them. In my first job, I had a great VP sales. I mentioned that I had a great boss. And I stayed in touch with this guy for years. Every like 6 months or so, I'd be like, hey, want to have lunch? He was a executive at Shopify at the time. And I'd be like, they had free food. So I'd be like, I'm going to come have lunch with you. And I'd eat some free food and we'd stay in touch and I'd ask him some questions and I'd, just maintain that relationship. And I did this for years. And then when I had decided that I was finally going to leave that sort of toxic director job, I was having lunch with him and I just sort of mentioned in passing. I was like, yeah, you know what? It's not going to happen for me here. I've realized this. They're never going to make me a VP. I actually think I'm going to start like looking at my options. And lo and behold, he was advising a fast growing tech company and mentioned it to me. He was like, you know what? Would you ever move out of biotech? Because I think these guys are looking for you. Like, he's like, they've been trying to find a VP sales. They can't find someone that has the right background. He's like, look at this job description. Like, they are looking for you. Sure enough, like, he introduced me to the CEO. We had breakfast, had a great chat, and I ended up getting hired as a VP sales there. Had I not kept in touch with this person, like, I don't know if I ever would have learned about that opportunity. Right? Like maybe I never would have, maybe I'd still be at this bankrupt company. Actually, I'd probably be unemployed now. So it is worthwhile. Like you would be amazed at the things you can learn from people in your network. Similarly, like I remember there was one young lady who like back in the day, she wanted to come work for me. I had like we were so under resourced at the company I was at. I was like, listen, I've got like no resources to hire you, but she impressed me so much. I was like, you know what? I'm going to make it my mission to find you a job. And I introduced her like to different sales leaders. I ended up getting her a job and she ended up working at that company for like years. She was like a landed immigrant at the time. She ended up getting her Canadian citizenship. She was like thanking me down the road. But like networking is a really powerful thing. You can help lots of people. They can help you. And so I always say like, never underestimate the power of networking. Next thing, setting yourself up for success is actually take some time and get to understand like, what is my story and what's the impact I've had? And this is when you're starting to like think about, hey, I want to go move to another company, right? A lot of my clients, I suggest like, you should have an idea of like, what is your elevator pitch? When someone says, hey, what's your story? What do you do? What's your background? A lot of people launch into a really long explanation of everything they've ever done. And the truth is nobody wants to hear that. Like no one cares. Like if you're a salesperson, people kind of know what you've done, right? So what they want is the highlight reel. They want what drove you to do this? What was the biggest impact you had? Why are you here now? Right? They want the interesting stuff. But if you haven't prepped that, it's probably not just going to roll off your tongue. It actually takes a little bit of time to like sort of sift through and think about, if I were to tell people 3 things about me, what would it be? The second part, like I mentioned, with respect to impact, that might have to do with interviews. It might have to do with your resume. Again, a lot of people love to share everything they've ever done, which is like, I worked at this job. I managed the Northeast Territory. I called on customers, 14 times a day. I wrote up proposals. Like, it's like nobody cares about that stuff. People care about what how you succeeded, right? What was your result? How did you do it according to plan? Or how did you do year over year? Or how did you do compared to your peers? Or when were you promoted? Like all of these things, right? So again, think about what is the highlight reel from each position you've had? What is the stuff people are really going to care about? And even if you've been at a company, like when I was at that early stage company, I wasn't able to say we blew our targets out of the water. We didn't, like, right? Like we were struggling. And so instead it was like, what did I learn? What did I achieve? There was actually, when I sat down and thought about it, there was a lot of stuff that I had achieved. I wasn't able to say I hit 150% of our quota. It wasn't true, right? So don't lie. But think about, like, there's probably still some pretty powerful things that you were able to contribute to. And those are the things that you want to kind of bring out. Last thing I'll say there is I had a client who, she was like, I've done all these different jobs. Like, I don't really know how to tell people what I do. I don't even know who's going to hire me. So again, like, I'm good at connecting the dots, right? So I was like, tell me everything you've done. So she just started like telling me all of these words. And I was able to quickly like go through and be like, yeah, you like create new processes and efficiencies, you know, in operations for hypergrowth companies to help them grow in a more efficient way. Like that's what you do. You're the person who's operationally figures out how to actually scale properly and put the right processes in place. And there was like lots of different positions, but that was like the common thread. And so as soon as she figured that out, she was actually able to very quickly land a new, more senior job because she just like knew, she's like, this is my thing. So worth spending some time to try to figure that out. Okay, last but not least, how do you negotiate? So this is a framework I came up with based on the things that like my experience in negotiating, my experience as a leader and having people come negotiate with me. And the great thing about it, so it's just DFT, do your homework, frame the ask, time it right, is you can use it for any negotiation. So whether it's a promotion at your current company, whether it's a raise, whether it's a new salary negotiation. The nuance is going to be different, right? Depending on what kind of negotiation it is, but like the framework is the same. So first, as always, do your homework. If you're walking into a negotiation and you don't have a good sense, like let's say it's a new job and you don't know like what the market rate is, what people are getting paid, you are doing yourself a disservice, right? So spend the time, do your homework in terms of like, what should I be being paid for this role? There's lots of resources out there. There's lots of like websites that show salaries and bonuses and sales comp. Something to think about if you're on a salary site is sometimes there is a wide range. Like sometimes they'll be like, you know, this role pays between $60,000 and $100,000 or $100,000 and $200,000. Like it's a big range. So things to ask yourself in that case are, what's the location of the company? Because geography matters, unfortunately. What's the stage of company? How well funded are they? How senior are you compared to the band for this role, right? Like, are you coming into this role as like the most junior person? Or are you coming into this role as the most senior person? And like, be honest with yourself about these things. And that can help you place, you know, what you think is going to be realistic within that larger range.
Can I make a quick point about the funding comment?
Yeah.
You got to be real careful here because it doesn't really matter how much they've raised. It matters how much they have left and how much they're burning.
True.
So if somebody is like, yeah, we're well capitalized, we raised $100 million. Well, that doesn't mean shit if they raised $100 million last year and they've spent 94 million of it and they've got 4 months worth of runway because they're burning everything else. So just dig in, you know, a little deeper. Somebody who raises 5 million, who's only burning through 50K a month, has a lot more runway than somebody who's raised way more, that's burning way more. Anyways, just wanted to throw that part out there.
It's a good point. It's a good point. I mean, I've worked at companies, generally speaking, the reason it's good to know how well funded they are is I've worked at some companies that are just like chronically underfunded. And it's like, you know, with that company, it's like, we pay everyone below market. That was just their thing. We pay below market because we don't have any money. And so people had to be willing. There was no wiggle room. It's just like, you're coming in here, well, this is what you're getting paid. So depending, like we talked about this before, money might not be everything to you, or maybe it is. Like maybe that's like right at the top of your list of criteria. But depending on the stage of company you're at, if they're like super startup, sometimes you're getting paid in like weekly dim sum, right? Like it's like early stage. There's not always a lot of wiggle room for negotiation.
I can actually share a really quick story on that experience. Exactly what Scott's saying is my very first tech company that I went to was pre-revenue, but they had just gotten a $14 million raise from Blue Cross Blue Shield. I'm in the Bay Area, and they had a beautiful office space in Embarcadero, burned through all the money in a year with, pre-revenue.
Wow.
And a little later in my career, I worked for a bootstrapped company that had, no funds raised. We were all paid well, and we had a great exit.
Mm-hmm. Actually, my highest salary was at a bootstrap company as well. Yeah, that's a great point. And oftentimes they'll share that. I mean, they're not going to necessarily share what their financial situation is specifically, but like I was able to tease a lot of that out in the interview process as well, right? So, the other part of doing your homework too can be like talking to people. So you might not want to say to someone like, "Hey Scott, what's your salary exactly?" Right? Like, but you can also always ask, "What's a reasonable range at this company?" Like, especially if someone's in a hiring position, what are people generally getting paid, in these types of positions? A range does feel more comfortable often to ask people than like, what is their exact comp package? But there is a lot more talk now too about transparency of salaries, right? I'm part of like a mastermind where we share a lot with respect to rates and what people are getting paid, and because it's helpful for everyone. So long story short, do your homework. If you're trying to get promoted, by the way, do your homework looks really different. In this case, do your homework looks like create your compelling case. How have you gone above and beyond? Why should you be stepping into a more senior role? Right? Like it's creating that. That is doing your homework in this case. So like I said, it might look different depending on what you're trying to achieve, but the important part is doing the prep. Second one is
I actually have a question, Katie.
Yeah.
A quick question, kind of on that negotiation. I'd just love to get your thoughts on this. I'm in Pavilion, and I was listening in on a CRO monthly meeting, and they were talking about, with everything going on in tech, how they're really pushing people to negotiate severance in their offer letters. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a great question. Honestly, I would say it depends on how important it is to you. Right? Like I was always of the mind that I never really thought about that, because I was like, I am very hireable. Like if this doesn't work, I'm gonna bounce to the next. It is smart to have that insurance though. Right? So with any negotiation, and so this is actually something I was going to mention in framing your ask, get clear on what is most important to you. It could be having a severance package so that you feel secure. It could be having a lot of paid time off. It could be having a flexible work arrangement most companies are doing this now, but some are still not, right? It could be like you want to hire OTE, but you're willing to take a lot of it in commission versus base, or maybe you feel more secure with a larger base. So all of these things, like there's all types of ways to create a package. There's equity, there's all kinds of things, right? So generally speaking, when you're negotiating your offer, it's good to understand what are the things that are most important to you and make sure that they're front and center. Because then you can often say, you know what? Let's say they offer you, I'm just going to use a round number. Let's say they offer you 100K and you wanted 110. You might be willing to say, you know what? I was looking for closer to 110 or 120. That said, what's really important to me is the security of a strong severance package. So what about, I meet you at 100. However, the severance looks like this. Right. So it's like any negotiation where oftentimes, and I'm actually going to throw this out to the women here, where oftentimes we can face what's called a likability backlash, which just simply means like you're advocating for yourself or you're negotiating for yourself, and you can be seen as less likable. So it's this unfortunate phenomenon. However, one way to combat it is by using more collaborative language, right? So, I mean, ideally we just fix it, but until then, if we want to negotiate before we change the world, using collaborative language like, hey, you know, I was doing my research, I was looking for something more in this range. That said, I'm like, I'd love to be flexible and work together. This is what's most important to me. How do you feel about a package that looks like this? And so really ensuring that you're getting what's most important to you. Because again, there's like probably 5 or 6 things that you could be prioritizing in your negotiation other than just base salary. I was going to mention one other thing here. Hang on. Tip of my tongue. Oh, with respect to negotiating, one of the big don'ts, don't make it about personal stuff, right? Or maybe the do is keep it objective. And by that, I mean, I've had lots of people in my career as a leader come to me and ask for a raise for reasons that simply do not warrant a raise. So like, hey, I broke up with my boyfriend or girlfriend and now I have to pay twice the rent. I need a raise. And I'm like, my heart goes out to you. I would love to give you some money personally, but like, I can't justify a raise based on that, right? So it's always like, keep it objective. This is why the first one's always do your homework, so that you have like, create that solid case so that you can say, this is why this is justified. This isn't me asking, this is the research, right? Like, point back to that, because it's just a lot more compelling to be able to point to something tangible, objective, than just say like, I think I'm worth more than that. Maybe you do think you're worth more than that, and maybe it's true, but it won't have the same impact if you're communicating that. Last one, time it right. When it comes to, this is my personal opinion, actually, I'll be curious if anyone disagrees with me on this, but when it comes to a new job, what I have always found works best for me is I might get the range at the beginning to just make sure it's not like crazy outside of what I'm willing to come work for. But I wait to negotiate the actual offer until they really want me. Because once they like are in love with you, they have like, all right, so Scott's agreeing. They have spent like time and money and resources into finding the one who is you, right? Which puts you at a really great leverage position. And chances are they do not want to go back to the drawing board and like open up the position again or go to their next candidate. They want you. And they won't usually let you go for a measly 5 or 10 or 20K or whatever it is. Like they want to bring it home. So I can say on someone who's been on both sides of the table, it's a really great time to negotiate. Now, if you're really worried about like, I don't want to waste my time going through the interview process, like I said, you can always ask for the range closer to the beginning, especially from like the HR person or recruiter or whoever you might be dealing with. They can often give you a range. But again, sometimes even at that end period, you can negotiate above the range. And my default was always like, okay, here's the range. I'm just going to ask for the top. Like, why would I not take the top of the range? Why would anyone ask for the bottom of the range? Was just always my thought. I was a little bit bold and sassy though. So, but what I did, it worked. So I remember there was one position I was in, and this woman, she was like 15 years more senior than me, like lots more sales experience. And she brought up salary. And I was always of the mind, like, I would just never open my mouth. I'm like, I don't want to get in the drama. I don't want to start, you know. And she mentioned her salary to me, and it was 15K less than mine. And I was like, holy shit, you did not negotiate well. I didn't tell her that because again, I was like, not opening that can of worms, don't want to be involved. But it was a reminder for me, go for the top. You might not get the absolute top, but you're going to get closer to the top than if you start at the bottom. Final point before I stop talking. Should you make the first offer, or should you let the company make the first offer? This is a question I get asked a lot. A lot of it comes down to your personal comfort level, right? If you feel comfortable making the first offer. However, 2 things I'll share. One is when I have done this, and I remember there was my first VP job, they asked me they were like, okay, what's it going to take to get you here? And I was like, you know what? You make the first volley. I'm sure we'll figure it out. Right. Because I really felt strongly, I want them to make the first offer. Like, this is my power move. And they lowballed me. And so what that did psychologically, I was more afraid to ask for what I really wanted. Like, I still asked for a fair bit more than what they offered me, but it's not as high as I could have asked for. Like, in retrospect, now that I know what I know, I could have gotten more from them, but I was too scared. I was like, I'm already asking for, like, I can't remember how much more. It was like, 40K more than what they were offering me, which already felt like extremely bold. But their budget was even more than that. They had just really lowballed me. So that's one thing to beware of if you're forcing them to make the first offer. The second is that there actually is some data out there that showed when the candidate makes the first offer, the resulting salary is 17% higher. So lots of people don't like to make the first offer. That if you look at LinkedIn, it's all about like how to not make the first offer, right? Like, that's generally what I see out there. From my personal experience, when I've read, it can really benefit you to make the first offer, as long as it's not crazy, right? Like, if you know that the range is 1 to 150 and you ask for 300, it might be like you're smoking something, right? So you don't want to be crazy, but if you've done your research and it's reasonable and they really want you, even if you're above their range, they'll probably be honest and tell you. They're not going to be like, you know what, that's outside the range, let's never talk again. Instead, they're probably going to say, wow, that's quite a bit higher than what we were prepared to pay. Like, the high end of our range was this. Like, that's what they'll probably share with you. And then you can go from there, right? Now you're starting at the top of their range. Much better place to start from than maybe the bottom of their range. So I'm going to leave it there. I would love to open it up if anyone, I know we had some questions during the talk itself, but if people have other questions, I would be happy to get into it, and I'll stop sharing too.
Go ahead, y'all. Don't be shy.
Katy, I have a question.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on when you're in those initial pre-screenings and you just ask for the range and then the recruiter comes back with, oh, it's going to depend on your experience. This way. And I'm like, well, I don't want to shoot myself in the foot.
Yeah. I mean, me personally, I would probably push back a little on the range. Like, I'd probably say, yeah, I fully understand it's going to be dependent on experience and probably a number of other factors. I'm just curious about the overall range, knowing that I'm going to fit somewhere in it, right? Because again, you're not asking for where do I fit in the range. You're just asking for the broad, and honestly, they know it. If they're pretending they don't know it, I'm gonna actually go on a limb here and say they're lying, because every hiring manager has an idea, or anyone who's recruiting knows broadly speaking what the range is, right? So I'd probably, if it was me, I'd probably push back a little bit and be like, totally understand that I'm going to be somewhere on this range. You probably can't share a specific number with me. I'm just wondering, like, broadly speaking, are we looking at 50 to 70 or 300 to 400? Like, where do we sit on this scale?
Something.
Actually, in California and probably some other states, they're legally required to disclose that if you ask what the range is. I don't know if everybody does, but
I've often worked, like, on the hiring side. I often worked with recruiters who were like a little too sherry. Like, they would be like, candidates would come in, they're like, yeah, so and so told me that, the base is like 100K, and I'd be like, what? That is like the top end of it, and this guy has like 1 year of experience. Like, why did he share that? So I've also experienced the other side on the hiring side, which will be a little frustrating, but yeah, usually the recruiter is going to be motivated to give you the range.
Yeah.
And then the goal is, like, how do you create the case throughout the process that means you should be at the top of the range?
Understood.
I find it really interesting how much nicer all of you are than I am. I would not be motivated to continue a process with somebody who was withholding information from me. That
Well,
recruiter,
mostly women. on this that
I
are
understand.
on the screen.
I understand. I just saying I find it interesting how much
Yeah.
nicer all of you are than me. I would not continue with that process because I'd feel like they were withholding information from me, and they're representative of the company, which tells me that company is going to be sneaky in withholding of information from me. So that gives me all the like heebie-jeebies and red flags. I left this like snarky comment in the chat, but I would 100% say that if somebody said to me, it's dependent upon your experience, I'd be like, listen, dude, my experience is right in front of you. You're literally looking at my resume. I don't know what else you need to come up with a range. I don't play defense on these types of things. I very much play offense. Whether I need the job, don't care if I get the job, desperately want the job, I'm playing offense.
So I'm
I don't know if
curious,
that's
Scott.
I don't know if that's like a gender thing or like a middle-aged, well-to-do white man thing or whatever it is, but
Both.
It's both.
I find it very interesting the difference in the approach.
Mm-hmm.
So Scott, when you were negotiating for VP of sales roles, like before you started your own gig,
Yes, 50 years
did
ago.
you go what?
50 years ago, yes.
Yeah, well, I didn't put the number. I wasn't going to say 50, but did you do what Katy said? Because that was a big aha moment for me, is to start the negotiation with the number you have in mind. I always learned you never negotiate against yourself because you could be leaving money on the table. But I'm just wondering which approach you took.
I did, but it's not because I'm smart like Katy and read all sorts of research and have the numbers. I mean, I did it just because I think I tend to be more aggressive. So I would say to people, this is what I'm earning right now. This is what makes me think about saying yes. And this is what makes me stop talking to anybody else. And then I would say to everybody, I hate negotiating. So whatever offer you send to me, I expect it to be your best offer because you don't get a second chance.
Nice.
Now, I am also on record many times over. The last time I interviewed for VP of sales role, I got 10 different offers from like 8 different parts of the world. So I'm not one of these people that like locks in on one opportunity. I collect paper in terms of offer letters, and then I just pit them all against each other. So I don't know if I answered your question the way that you were hoping, but that was the last process.
Definitely did. And I love how you characterized it as, good, better, best, right? This is what it would take for me to not stop talking to everyone else. And then I love asking for the final and best offer too.
Yeah.
I think it's both very creative and well done. I don't know, Katy, what do you think? Would you ever use that approach?
I would not. And only because I've read too much about the likability backlash that I might do it now, because to be honest, as I got more senior, right? Like when I was negotiating my EVP sales role, I felt a lot different about like what I was bringing to the table. And I was like, you don't want to hire me, I don't give a shit. Like, this is what it's going to take.
It's very role
to bring me. It's bolder. Generally, that level of boldness is not as well received when it's from a female. I hate to say this, and I hate to say it when it's being recorded even more, but it's true.
It's true.
It's true.
And you seem like bossy or the bitch, which I hate. Like, how come it's okay for Scott to say it and it's not offensive? But it's true.
Well, and so you can still do it, but the idea is to preempt it by saying, listen, I want to make sure we're clear that, like really excited with this opportunity. I really want to be collaborative with you on figuring this out, but I also want to be fully transparent that I don't love to negotiate. And so the offer you send me, I'm going to take as your final offer. And I am talking to other companies. I'm really excited about our conversation. I would love, this to be the one, but this is the number that would allow me to feel like I can commit. So it's a version of what Scott says. But for me personally, I just know I would struggle to say it. I love that you say it that way, Scott, by the way. I think it's great. I wish more people would just be like, this is the deal. But I just know for me personally, I would probably just like round those edges a little bit.
I also agree with Katie in what you're saying too. I think it's a lot easier to take that stance the more established you are in your career.
Yeah, just to be clear, I would never say that if I was an SDR or an AE or a sales manager or anything like that. I'm just talking about somebody who's been an executive more than one time over, knows what they bring to the table, knows that they can get lots of different offers, for sure. It is frustrating that you all experience that. Is if one of you talk to me like that, you get fucking hired on the spot. Because I would 100% appreciate somebody being that direct. You know, I
think you can be direct though. Like I'm still, my communication style is very direct. Like I do add in, like I said, I add in collaborative language, and I largely do it strategically. Yeah. Truthfully, right? I do it because I know that it works. But I am a fan of being, I want to make sure that regardless of what side of the fence you're on, I don't think it helps to dance around what you want. Like, I think you can still be super clear about what you want. And like I said, even though I've often tried to ensure that I was collaborative with my language, I also always asked for the high end of the salary band, and I generally always got it. Right? So you can be confident in what you're bringing to the table. And like, I really feel like I'm going to contribute a lot to your company, and I'm well worth this, with doing it in a way that feels good to you, I guess is the best way to say it. And if being super direct, if using Scott's approach feels good to you, then do it. Right? Like, I think to me, it's like doing what feels good to you is more important than even than being strategic in some of the stuff.
Yeah, and I would agree with what you're saying. And I would just add, you know, when you get to a certain level, like I'm at an SVP level, and the last role, you know, I think as you get number one, older, but you also have the experience to back it up. I own my own journey, and I'm with Scott. If you don't want me, this is my authentic self, then I don't want to work with you. That's a red flag. So I've been told I'm pushy, whatever. I'm like, but if a man did it, and I'm just saying, if a man said what I said, they wouldn't be called pushy, right? But I'm just like, this is who I am. I'm not for everyone. And if you say that, there's, you know,
I love that. By the way, I've definitely been called pushy.
Well,
I just don't care. I just don't care, because that part that you said, Randy, where it's like, this is my authentic self and this is who I am. And if I have to fake who I am to get this role, it's going to end badly anyway.
Yeah,
that's a really good point.
Because I'm not for everyone, and I wear it proudly, because I'm like, I earned to get where I am, and I'm not going to let anyone make me feel smaller.
Good for you.
Getting my life.
Randy's got me fired up now.
Yeah,
I am for everyone.
Randy, I also add to, I totally align with what you're saying. I also add, you would want me to negotiate that like this on your behalf.
Yes.
You know, because I am an SVP of sales, right? So if I play small, I'm going to play small for them. So I don't, you know, I don't try to defend my ask.
Yeah.
This is a super interesting conversation though. And I think, you know, I've done a ton with women's organizations. I've also done Lean In and a lot of others. And I've gotten to the point now where it's like, I've mentored a lot of younger women in sales and in tech and in returning to the workforce. And I don't want to get in the conversation anymore unless there's men in the room. You know, I think women need to hear from Scott's perspective, because it's when you're earlier in your career, women tend to default to the being less offensive. And that's a skill that I think, you know, Scott, you need to go coach Lean In and all these other organizations to, you know, to be stronger.
Well, you know, there's a different version of discrimination that I face. Those types of people don't want to deal with somebody like me. Those are the people that tell me to send a different headshot for their website images and shit like that, which by the way, just happened to me again today.
Wow. Lori, do you have a question?
Lori, go for it.
Oh my God, I do have a question. I have on the other side of the aisle question. I have my jobs are posted online, title, salary, whether you're in office, not, it is all very clear. I have my first pass is someone who makes it clear that we know what we're doing, that these things are in line, skill set, etc. Then I come in as the hiring manager, and I'm wasting a lot of time with people who are so excited to talk to me to then tell me they're non-negotiable, that the things that were already pre-approved, that is posted online, that is that. And then they're like, oh, because I read you just have to negotiate this. You have to. I'm like, we posted it. We told you it was very clear. We told you this is exactly it. It is data backed. It is as clear as humanly possible. So leader Lori is like, pardon, the actual fuck are you doing on the phone with me right now? And like good old LD is like, get it, queen. Like whoever's asking, negotiating, like I'm both humans on this call. At the end of the day, it is immovable on that. I was very clear when I posted it. I made sure we did top of range as the top of range. We're very clear on that. And I am asking on each call if we are clear on that. You know, any support or guidance there, because I am both women. I am truly, someone asked me for more. I'm like, pop off. You know, I'm sure someone will pay you that. Absolutely. We're not. Like, we can stop the call now. But like, so excited for you. And I also have hiring that I need to make happen in a certain time. So I'm very stressed with that. So do you have any advice there on how to handle this side of the aisle with that?
Yeah. Are they waiting till the very end, or are they telling you on their first call with you? I'm curious.
Sometimes my first call, other times after I've already vetted. We have like a pretty strict process, scorecards at different phases. Like, it's all mapped out process wise. That's the job, is to make process. So I'm doing it. And they're just coming out of the woodworks and just messing with me.
Because I wonder too, like, so I wonder if you could get this, like, nip it in the bud even earlier, even before they talk to you. So I know that the first person's checking it. Are they saying?
She's being like, there is no wiggle room. This is it.
Okay. And they're still.
And being real clear, this is it. And I've even gotten recruiting firms involved in this, because it has been a standstill for 6 weeks, 8 weeks with this. And I tell them, and they say, absolutely, we won't let them ask it. And they get to me and they're asking it again. I don't know what's happening here.
It's really odd.
It's very annoying.
Well, I wonder, like, is your range out of whack?
Our range is data backed to the max. Like, I have pulled source upon source upon source. I have dropped the highest and the lowest, Olympic status, and I've done the average of the middle. I have figured out a few people that I could do, you know, based on performance at the 12-month, 18-month mark, we could do promotion and bonuses. I've done the things, and I am dying with these people.
I know. Like, this is probably like not good advice, but I would almost be like, maybe you should just like bump your salary range a little bit lower.
No, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen, because we then have no science backing it. And now we have salary creep, and we're watching, like, I'm in a climate trucking company. There are 5 other trucking companies in my region that have all either gone under or have reduced by 95% in the past 4 months.
Wow.
It is because of salary creep. And I can't let that happen here. The company
you say so it's data backed, but like, maybe they've worked for some of these other companies that have let things get a little crazy, which is why they're no longer around, but they think, okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a tough one. I think all you can do is ask at the end of every call, right? Like, what else? You know, it sounds like everyone's doing the right stuff. And I agree with you.
Supportive, like you're saying. I want to lift up like all these ladies who are saying do these things. I want to do that. I want to be that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we are unable to meet those needs.
Well, and I mean, often with folks, I've had to give lots of hard news in my life, right? Like, which is just like telling people what they don't want to hear. And you're very transparent. Like, it sounds like when you're telling me this, I'm like, this feels very reasonable, right? You've done your due diligence. You've created the right range. You feel good about it. That's what I would be sharing with people. Like, I'd probably be saying, before we end this call, and I know you said you were okay with it. Like, however, I want to just be super clear before we take this process any further and waste people's time. This is why we have the band that we have. This is the work that went into it. And I just want you to understand that this is what we're working within. So before we move to the next step, because the next step's like, the next step, we're going to get more people involved or whatever it is. I need to make sure you're comfortable with this because, we don't want to waste people's time. I know you've been doing that, but it's like, I don't know. To me, I don't know. Scott, do you have thoughts? Like, it's hard for me to.
Sorry, I messaged you privately, but I just went through something super similar with Demand OS. We were hiring for a lead gen manager, and like very clearly put on our JD, like, here's the range. It's like 90 to 100. This is, kind of the breakdown of what we're looking for. This is the amount of experience we need. And we had tons of people reaching out. We were going through, I think, like 4 calls with somebody and kept being like, is this range good for you, within your range? Like, based on your experience, looks like we're on track, even a little bit higher. Whole time he was like, yep, good. And then we got to the last day before we're going to send an offer out, and he negotiated up like $50K. And we had to come back. I think I talked to Scott about this too, but I had come back to him and said, like, okay, you've been a lead gen manager for probably about a year and a half. If you can find an offer at the high, that salary that you're trying to negotiate, 50K over, you should definitely take it in this market. But like, most likely you're not getting that offer. And he came back the next day and signed. So it's a little bit of like playing hard. You have to go after and look at those roles specifically and and talk to people and see what genuinely those people are getting paid, and look at the experience time frame of how long they've actually done the role and what they've done. So it's like a little bit of back channeling, but yeah, if you kind of word it, like, if you can get that offer, go for it.
That's
Most likely you're
where I've
not.
been.
So
I'm hesitant to bring someone back on though when they're negotiating like that at late stage, because I don't want them to churn in 6 months.
Wait. But you're offering them like dog shit money. So you have to like respect the fact that they're pushing back a little bit, I think.
Which I do, but I don't have the wiggle room.
But you hesitate to hire them. I don't know. In your situation, I might not hesitate.
Okay.
The other thing that I've been in this position before, by the way, multiple times, where I've literally fought tooth and nail and been like, people can't exist on what you want me to hire people at. So my only strategy, Lori, was to go more and more junior. And just find people who are so beyond grateful, not somebody who's like, I don't know if I can make this work. I'm talking about people who are used to like bartending and being out all night, or somebody who like just graduated college and has never worked a day in their life, or somebody who just got out of rehab, or somebody who just got out of jail. I'm being dead serious right now. Like, people who are absolutely grateful for the opportunity and they just want a foot in the door and they're ready, willing, and able to do whatever is necessary to change their life. Those are the only people that I could get. So I bet on my ability to develop those people. And, I sold one of those companies to GoDaddy for 9 figures. So that was my only way, because I couldn't actually hire people that had any of the right experience. So I just went way to the other extreme, and I'm like, I'm hiring anybody. And it's all based on like, not what this person has done, but who they are right now and where they want to go, and betting on myself and them, together.
Okay.
It's a great point. I've worked at 2 startups where we hired new grads specifically because of funding. Like, because that's what we could afford, right? And it's like, obviously depends on the role and whether it's something you can train up. But oftentimes, like, the other benefit of that is you can train the person to do the job exactly as you want them to.
That's right.
They don't necessarily come in with their own,
Get 'em bad
preconceived
habits.
ideas.
Yeah. They're entirely, they're like, Lori gets to shape them.
Yeah. They're sponges.
I'm telling you, like, if you make an impact with some of these people and get them on the right path, like, they will run through a brick wall for you forever. And there's like I'm gonna screw the word up, but like, there's a feeling that you get where you realize you've literally changed some of these people's lives. And I would rather work with somebody like that any day than somebody who's like, I want 55 instead of 50. Dude.
I'm with Scott on this. I mean, I've worked, when I was on the commercial lab side, there was always this requirement you had to have knowledge. And I'm all about attitude and because I can teach you lab, I can teach you this. And I've had people loyal to me and say, I would follow you. And I brought them along to other roles, and they've learned that too, because they've demonstrated, and I believed in myself that I could teach them. You didn't need to have XYZ experience or know the jargon. I can teach you that. It's, are you open and willing to be coached? And I realize maybe depending in the stage of the company, maybe you need people who know right now, and you don't have the time to scale, that you need to someone to hit the ground running. But if you have people who are if I can use the term hungry, that they just want the opportunity, whether they're transitioning or haven't done it before, but they want to try, it can be a great resource.
Yeah. All right. I've got to get going to get my kids from practice. So I want to turn it over to Katy. Any parting shots, last words for us?
No, this is great. This is great. I want to just say, like, thanks for the great conversation. You guys brought up some interesting questions and good perspectives, which is like always fun. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for spending some time with us. We really appreciate you and appreciate all of you coming to Tequila Tuesday, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.